So my name is Patricia Teffenhart. I'm the Executive Director here at the New Jersey Coalition Against Sexual Assault, or NJCASA. And I want to thank you all for joining us this evening as we release the findings of It's Everywhere, It's Everything, the report of NJCASA's 2020 survey on misogyny and sexual misconduct in New Jersey politics. So let's start with how did we get here? In 2017, a bold political operative wrote a piece about the prevalence of sexual misconduct in New Jersey politics and how attendees at major statewide convenings understood this behavior to be an expected hazard of the job. In October 2018, a Wall Street Journal article detailed the experience of a campaign volunteer who reported having been sexually assaulted by a campaign worker while both were involved in a statewide election effort here in New Jersey. After this story broke, a slow drip began, more disclosures. These disclosures certainly sparked some action, including others detailing the toxicity of the old boys network, the mentality in New Jersey politics, a special legislative committee examining the issue, the discussion of the use of non-disclosure agreements for those on campaigns, and the expansion of the civil statute of limitations for sexual assault in New Jersey. But over a year later, the dam broke. In December 2019, the Star Ledger published a story highlighting the experiences of 20 campaign staffers, lobbyists, political operatives, and lawmakers, detailing rampant misogyny, sexual harassment, and assault in the New Jersey political sphere. They shared experiences of being assaulted following work events, inappropriately touched by male lawmakers and others who held influence over their careers, and more. Here's what we know. For every story we hear, there are too many we don't. Sexual violence is about power and control, and there's no system in which power dynamics are more clear and more at play than in politics. And that's why NJCASA launched our survey on misogyny and misconduct in New Jersey politics earlier this year. And tonight, we'll discuss our findings. It's important to note that this discussion is happening only days after the presumptive Democratic nominee for president picked a brilliant, ambitious Black woman to be his running mate. What our survey reveals is just how hard it is for any woman to ascend through the ranks of political power, let alone a first-generation woman of color. Regardless of our political affiliations, we should be observing the ways in which she's discussed in the media and online. The commentary to date has been expectedly horrific, racist, misogynistic, xenophobic, hateful. And that's only what we're seeing. Imagine all of the things she's endured during her rise. If this is how people treat her in public, imagine what goes on behind the scenes. Imagine what similar hurdles have existed for our own lieutenant governor. So let's tonight imagine a world where any smart, confident woman can rise to political leadership without these unnecessary barriers. Let's imagine that we can start here in New Jersey. We're joined tonight by a special panel of women in government and politics with the understanding that so much of what we cover in our report can feel intangible. It's just a number, a percentage. Data about behavior that in most cases doesn't quite constitute a crime, but nonetheless causes harm. We wanted to breathe life into the over 500 anonymous responses to our survey, to honor the disclosures that were made and the lived experiences that were shared. As we'll discuss, even completing the survey was anxiety-provoking for some respondents. Tonight, we thank them for their contributions to this report and commit to responsive action in their honor. And finally, before we dig deep into the content of the report, I want to thank Senator Weinberg, Lieutenant Governor Oliver, and my friends and colleagues with whom I had the pleasure of serving on the work group on misogyny, harassment, and assault in New Jersey politics. The creation of this survey was derived out of one of our very early work group sessions, and the dissemination of the survey instrument was largely facilitated by my colleagues on the work group. They helped us garner such a robust response. It's been a pleasure serving on the work group with each of you, and I can't think of better people with whom I'd like to smash the patriarchy here in New Jersey. I want to thank also my colleague who's with us tonight, Marissa Marzano. She's NJCASA's communications manager, but she's so much more than that. She herself is a brilliant, talented woman who has endless potential. And I'm thank you for diving into the survey responses and compiling them into such a comprehensive report. Your presentation of the data is thoughtful and detailed, and I'm incredibly proud to have you as my colleague and appreciate all that you do in support of New Jersey and survivors. With that, I'm going to turn things over to you, Marissa, to welcome our panelists and to kick things off.
Great. Thank you so much, Patricia. I want to just echo your sentiments. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us tonight. Thank you so much to everyone who's taking time out of their night to join us on Zoom and participate. We really, really appreciate you. And I've been so excited all week for tonight. I keep texting Patricia like, I can't wait till Thursday. So welcome and thank you for being with us. The truth is the public release of this report has been a long time coming, and our hope, NJCASA's hope, is that we can lay bare the unfortunate truth about the impact and prevalence of misogyny and harassment in government and politics here in New Jersey, and together join in collective action for a safer, more equitable arena for all of us. I do want to note that some of the content of our report and some of the content of our discussion tonight could be challenging, particularly if you yourself have experienced harm, or perhaps you have a loved one who has experienced harm. So if anyone in our audience would like or needs free and confidential support, you can call New Jersey's 24-hour confidential statewide hotline at 800-601-7200 at any time. And we'll also drop that number in the chat box. I want to also start by thanking the over 500 respondents who took the time to contribute to our findings. While the quantitative data we gathered shares an important truth, it was the open-ended responses that I think hit all of us the hardest. The anger, hurt, fear, disappointment, and frustration that came through your written words was palpable. And I know no matter what venue that you're doing it in, talking about harm that you've experienced is really difficult. So to everyone who took the time to share that feedback with us, we thank you so, so much. This report would simply not exist without you. So we are going to get started with a quick overview of our findings and then launch into a facilitated panel discussion with the 5 incredible women you see here involved in New Jersey government and politics. At the conclusion of the panel discussion, we will open things up from questions for our friends in the media and the press. Folks who are joining us on Zoom, please feel free to ask questions in the chat box and we will respond to questions as they come in. So let's get started with what we did and what we found. The survey was launched in January 2020, and participation in the survey was anonymous, voluntary, and open to anyone working or volunteering in New Jersey politics and government, or who previously worked and volunteered in the New Jersey political sphere. The survey was comprised of 27 discrete questions, which measured prevalence of sexual harassment, misconduct, and misogyny. The questions also assessed knowledge. How do I report, or how do you file a report? What is sexual harassment? Things like that. And it included belief-based questions as well. The survey also asked for demographic data, including race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexuality, education level, and citizenship status. Participants could opt out of providing any of that demographic data if they so chose. The survey closed in May 2020 and it yielded over 508 unique responses. The survey listed 10 different occupations that respondents could select to identify their work or volunteer role in government and politics. Overall, I'm pleased to say we have respondents from every occupational category. The highest percentage of respondents identified as advocates and activists, at 16%, followed by state government employees at 14% and partisan political operatives at 13%. The smallest number of respondents identified themselves as municipal government employees at 3%. We also gave an option for folks to select other. Most respondents who selected other did so to indicate that they were a former employee of one of the other surveyed occupations. Many also indicated that they held more than one of these occupations throughout their professional career, which just goes to show the really fluid nature of political work in New Jersey and also everywhere. A complete breakdown of respondent demographics can be found in the report itself, but for the purposes of tonight's conversation, it's really important to note that the respondents to this survey overwhelmingly hold incredible amounts of privilege. The survey was completed primarily by white, heterosexual, cisgender women who hold advanced degrees. And even with this considerable, pinnacle of professional and personal privilege, these folks still reported very high levels of harassment and assault, and oftentimes little opportunity for recourse. This leaves us wondering and probably able to draw a natural conclusion about what's happening to their colleagues who hold less of such privilege. The title of the report is "It's Everywhere, It's Everything," which is a direct quote from an open-ended survey response. And quite honestly, it was a very common theme throughout. The respondents understood that the issue of misogyny and harassment in politics was so pervasive that it influenced every aspect of their work. This was consistent among partisan political operatives, government employees, lobbyists, advocates, and activists, everyone. While Patricia and our incredible panel will dive more into the findings later on in our discussion, I did want to highlight a few key points at the outset. So 57% of respondents indicated that they experienced sexual harassment during their time working in New Jersey politics. Of the 10 occupations that we surveyed, the highest percentage of respondents indicated that they were harassed by an elected official, with 22%. In terms of what type of harassment folks were experiencing, 23% of respondents indicated that they experienced verbal remarks of a sexual nature, closely followed by sexist or misogynistic comments at 22%, and unwanted touching at 15%. 3% reported experiencing sexual assault or rape. So tonight, we're going to shine a bright light on our findings and breathe life into the anonymous stories that were shared with the help of our 5 incredible panelists who will really help us personalize this data. As the topic of misogyny and harassment often can be really vast and intangible, I thank all of you, our participants, for helping us put these findings into context. Each of them has an incredibly extensive background and bio, but for the purposes of our introductions tonight, we are just going to skim the surface of how impressive these women are. So I'm going to start introducing them now. Tonight we have with us Katie Brennan. Ms. Brennan joined the New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency as Chief of Staff in February 2018. Most recently, her work has centered on addressing health equity through housing and community development, including the first in the nation statewide hospital and housing partnership. Prior to her current role, Ms. Brennan served as the Program Director of Affordable Housing for the County of Hudson. Previous roles included serving as the Associate at Monarch Housing Associates, where she consulted with and for nonprofit developers, public housing authorities, and municipalities to expand the supply of permanent supportive housing across New Jersey. Ms. Brennan served on Governor Murphy's Economic Working Group and as the Deputy Policy Director for the Housing Transition Committee. She is honored to currently serve on the boards of the Waterfront Project, Now New Jersey, New Leaders Council New Jersey, and the Van Voorst Park Neighborhood Association. Ms. Brennan has a BA from Xavier University and a Master's of City and Regional Planning degree from the Rutgers Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. Next, we have Cory Frankfurt, who is the Finance Director of the New York State Senate Majority Conference's political arm, the New York Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, where she oversees the fundraising operations of the 40-member conference, the committees, and pertinent races. Her connection to matters involving sexual assault in New Jersey stem from her own experiences as a minor with assault. She left a career in the arts and went into politics due to the significant effects of her early life from being assaulted, with the hope of minimizing the social cost of women who experience the devastating crime, the humiliating process of the justice system, and the social fallout. In 2016, Cory published her first piece regarding rape in politics in The Observer, which was distributed nationally among the youth branch of the Democratic Party. In 2017, Cory published the first piece speaking to the sexual predation in politics in Insider NJ, with the focus on the behavior of attendees at the annual League of Municipalities conference, which laid the ground for women to come forward in New Jersey. Cory has also worked on these matters while serving in senior capacities in countywide races in Hudson County, while serving as the director of the Hudson County Department of Cultural Affairs and Tourism. She now mentors women in fundraising, as well as coaches women seeking the lowest social cost way to receive justice, in between working on the dozens of campaigns she seeks to help win. Next, we have Tiffany Kasuba. Tiffany is an accomplished public and government relations professional who has served as the project lead, strategist, advisor, and the public face for several organizations and issue campaigns, creating change in federal policy. She has nearly a decade of experience in consulting with nonprofit organizations, including their senior leadership, and has organized, built, and grown coalitions to advance key budget and health policy priorities. Tiffany left her position in Washington last year to pursue a run in her home district in New Jersey. In December, she ended her campaign to call attention to systemic harassment of women in New Jersey politics. She now serves as the co-chair of the Task Force to Prevent Discrimination and Harassment on Campaigns. Sabine Masih is the Vice President of Public Affairs at Capital Impact Group, a government affairs and business development firm based in Trenton. Sabine's policy expertise ranges from healthcare to animal welfare and alcohol and cannabis regulatory issues, representing a variety of industries, including insurance companies, animal welfare, and the wine industry. Though a native New Yorker, Sabine's vast experience spans from local to state government to state levels of government in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. While earning her dual BA in history and political science and a minor in Spanish at Drexel University, Sabine worked in Philadelphia on local and budgetary issues for Councilman Curtis Jones Jr. and on state campaigns as a speechwriter. Sabine then attended the Rutgers Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy and earned a Master's of Public Policy with an emphasis on political processes and institutions. Sabine co-founded the growing group Asian Women of Trenton Networking Group, an organization dedicated to connecting and increasing the number of women of Asian descent who are politically engaged throughout the state of New Jersey. She is also a member of the Eagleton Alumni Committee, the Bipartisan Coalition for Women's Appointments, and serves on the Mercer County Young Democrats Advisory Board. As a young advocate in Trenton, Sabine is also passionate about supporting the next generation of thought leaders and policymakers and serves as a mentor for the Rider Women's Leadership Council at Rider University, Rutgers Road to Government Policy and Service Program, and the Rutgers Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. And finally, we have Crystal Pruitt. Crystal currently serves as Chief of Staff for New Jersey State Assemblyman Andrew Zwicker. A graduate of North Carolina State University and John Jay College of Criminal Justice, she has worked for the Forensic Intensive Recovery Program in the 1st Judicial District of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Behavioral Health and Disability Services, Bronx Task Mental Health Court Diversion Program, the Bo Robinson Assessment and Treatment Center, and Amplify Incorporated. Ms. Pruitt officially transitioned into politics in 2017 as Director of Constituent Relations and Community Outreach for Assemblyman Zwicker. After that, she moved into the Murphy administration to work as legislative liaison for the New Jersey Department of Human Services before returning to the legislative branch as Chief of Staff. In January 2019, Ms. Pruitt was appointed to fulfill an unexpired term on the Franklin Township Council in Somerset County and went on to be elected to a full term as councilperson at large that November. Serving a population of over 65,000 residents, she is currently the youngest member of the township's council and only one of 2 women serving. Outside of her responsibilities as a chief of staff and a council person, Ms. Pruitt does work with organizations to help women secure access to reproductive health services, serves on the New Jersey office of the Attorney General's CLEAR Law Enforcement and the Black Community Work Group, and the work group on harassment, sexual assault, and misogyny in NJ politics. Other leadership positions of note include her previous role as diversity co-chair on the executive board of the New Jersey chapter of the New Leaders Council, vice president of the JFK Democratic Club of Franklin Township, and president of the Somerset County Young Democrats. Ms. Pruitt's strong commitment to social justice, behavioral health, and criminal justice continue to inform both her personal and professional pursuits. Recognized as a trailblazer in the New Jersey political scene, Pam's List honored Crystal as a woman who gets it done for 2019, and Insider NJ named her among its Insider 100 millennials. And finally, last but not least, tonight's panel discussion will be moderated by my boss, Patricia Tappenhart, our executive director here at NJ CASA. Under Patricia's leadership, NJ CASA has a record of success, including passing the Sexual Assault Survivors Protection Act of 2015, creating and co-chairing the governor-appointed Campus Sexual Assault Task Force, mandating regular sexual violence training for law enforcement, closing loopholes in hiring practices of school employees to protect our children from those who cause sexual harm, expanding New Jersey's civil statute of limitations for sexual assault, and increasing appropriations for sexual violences in the New Jersey state budget by over 733%. Patricia is a proud graduate of the Douglas College and holds a master's in public administration from the Rutgers School of Public Affairs and Administration. She has dedicated her career to the promotion and advancement of women and girls, having worked for countywide, statewide, and national feminist organizations. Patricia was a fellow in the Leadership New Jersey class of 2009 and is a 2014 recipient of the Alice Paul Equality Award. In 2016, NJ Biz included her in their top 40 under 40 professionals. United States Senator Bob Menendez honored her with an Evangelina Menendez Trailblazer Award in 2018. And for the last 5 years, Patricia was included in the Senate Majority Leader's New Jersey Women in Power list. In 2018, she was also included in the Insider NJ Power 100 list. She is an appointed member of Governor Murphy's transition team, and at the height of the Me Too movement, attended the 2018 State of the Union as a guest of Senator Bob Menendez. The Star Ledger included Patricia as one of the top 25 people to watch in 2018, and in 2019, she was recognized by the Zero Abuse Project for her leadership in support of child sexual abuse survivors. She is the elected co-chair of the Governor's Advisory Council Against Sexual Violence, and in 2020, she was asked by New Jersey Senate Majority Leader Loretta Weinberg to be a member of the work group on harassment, assault, and misogyny in NJ politics. Patricia currently serves on the board of directors for the Women's Political Caucus and the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence. We have an amazing panel, and I'm so thrilled to turn it back over to Patricia now so that we can dig in and learn more from these really fabulous, talented women. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. And again, thank all of you for joining us tonight. We have 87 attendees joining us on Zoom. We're still having technical difficulties with the Facebook Live, but we're strong, powerful, innovative women. So we're just gonna roll with it. We're recording this session. And so we're gonna figure that stuff out later, but we have such good content to get into with our amazing panelists that I don't wanna wait 1 second longer. So we're gonna just jump right in. In addition to my job here as the executive director at NJ CASA, I wanna note that I'm also a registered lobbyist, and that in my role as a registered lobbyist and as the ED at NJ CASA, I am required to interface often in order to do my job as an advocate with colleagues in the political arena and in elected office. And so just like our respondents to our survey and like our panelists with us tonight, this is personal for me as well. This isn't just a job. What we're talking about tonight really goes to the intersections of things that are both personal and professional for so many of us. And so I wanted to start with one of the open-ended responses that really spoke to this. One respondent said, quote, "All I wanted when I moved into this field was to do good work to make this state a better place, and had an expectation that I'd feel safe while doing it." When I read that response, it resonated with me so deeply. And so I wanted to start there. You're each working to make a positive impact in society. Tell us briefly about one of the things you've accomplished during your tenure in government and or politics of which you're most proud. I'm gonna start with Tiffany because you are unmuted, and then I'm gonna go to Corin because you're unmuted, and then we'll just go around.
All right, sounds good. And thank you, Patricia and Marissa, for bringing us together. So having worked in federal appropriations, trying to get money for non-defense programs and public health programs specifically, I have a lot of accomplishments to be proud of, but the one that is most personal and most proud for me is in 2020, I was able to secure a line of funding at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to finally begin doing research, or to finally support the research that's already happening elsewhere in prevention of child sexual abuse. About 1 in 10 children, according to the CDC, is a victim of child sexual abuse before they turn 18, and getting money started to prevent that at the federal level is one of the things I'm most proud of.
Thank you. Corin.
So in terms of me feeling proud, typically the celebration doesn't make any sense without the struggle. That moment when you realize that you can take a deep breath. And for me, coming from such an unsafe place and being in a position of power and access, finding myself in the presence of Andrea Stewart Cousins, the first Black majority leader of the New York State Senate, and working under probably the most important ally I've ever had, Mike Gineris, the DSCC chair, who has encouraged me to continue advocating, even though I've got I'll just say full-time job with him, with those 40 senators and several races in addition to that. So to come from a place from being an assault survivor who wanted to sing opera and classical music, being discarded on the side of the road and having to claw my way through for 19 years, which is really how long this has taken approximately, funding my father's first round of real illness, sleeping on couches, waiting tables, clawing my way into graduate school, getting out there, distributing my resume over 200 times, because in New Jersey, and the ladies may agree, that you got to be somebody's baby or you got to be somebody's baby, and it's really uncomfortable, which I think the findings allude to. Getting out there, getting jobs with people who get one hotel room for 2 people, and you're trying not to stay in the same room as your boss, things of those nature, things of that ilk, and finding yourself in a position where you can get access to people who can really make a change for these women. Being the person who gets called in the middle of the night because your phone number was given to them by a mutual friend, and coaching women in a way that makes me the safe space that I so much needed when I was first assaulted. And that 19-year moment, if we can call 19 years a moment in and of itself, and being able to make that full circle transition right now, I would say that the moment is now. I'm so proud to be with you ladies. So.
Oh, I wasn't expecting that as an answer, but thank you.
I'm full of surprises, Patricia.
That is true. You are full of surprises. I got my eye. Who wants to go next? Katie, Sabine, Crystal? Go ahead, Sabine.
Hi everyone, Sabine here, and Patricia and Marissa, thank you so much for organizing this. This is really wonderful to be part of this and alongside such esteemed ladies in power, so thank you very much. I would say, Corinne kind of alluded this to New Jersey politics. It is definitely an in-house kind of game, and as a New Yorker, it was very hard for me to kind of get my start in New Jersey, and I think the infrastructure is such that it's really hard to break in as a new person in general, let alone if you're a woman, let alone if you're a young woman, let alone if you're a young woman minority. So what I'm proudest of is I've finally been able to get to the place where I can give that support and structure to those that are trying to navigate their new path in Trenton through some of my, and of just politics in general, through my mentorship capabilities for Rutgers undergraduates, graduates, and Rider University. For me, it's been really fulfilling and probably annoying for my mentees who have to just hear me talk hours at them, but I always tell them, this is all the information I wish I had that I now know. So it's just really impactful for me to be able to be at a place that I can provide that support and stability, and frankly, that safe environment for hopefully some up and coming young people, and especially young women.
Thank you, Sabine. Crystal, you're unmuted, so I'm going to tag you next.
Well, I guess just to echo everyone who has just preceded me, thank you so much, Patricia and Marissa, for including me on this panel. It's such an honor to represent with the ladies. So as far as my proudest moment, I mean, I'm going to go with kind of the pattern that's been set. I guess my proudest moment, or series of proudest moments, are related to just me being in politics. I did not start out wanting to be in politics, and I felt compelled to get involved, and there were so many barriers because my education wasn't good enough. I didn't know the right people, all those obstacles. So when I really wanted to try it in 2015, I thought, it was never going to happen. And now in 2020, I'm a chief of staff and I'm an elected official myself. So that's a really proud moment for me. And it's also being in the room as a Black woman now, and being able to speak out and have the ability to say things and really address, you know, racism or instances of sexism in the spaces that I'm in, and being able to at times check people about what's coming out of their mouth and letting them know that it's not going to stand, and pushing my colleagues, especially, you know, maybe not always my colleagues, even people above me who may not look like me, to really start thinking in a diverse and equitable manner. So that's been kind of my feel-good moment. And I look forward to just, I want to keep going and have new moments to pick on, and hopefully show other young women, especially Black women, that there is space for us and there's not enough of us involved. And you don't have to look a certain way or act a certain way. You can wear your hair natural. You can do things that still achieve your identity and still be taken seriously and still be considered a professional. And if people don't treat you as a professional, you let them know. So that's been my kind of attitude going in, and, you know, hoping to bring women with me each level going forward.
Thank you. I appreciate all of that. We certainly didn't pick wallflowers for tonight's discussion by any means. Katie, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Patricia and Marissa, and really the whole group that's been at work at this for the past several months. I increasingly see the sides of myself as sort of the personal battle and the professional battle as the same, but so I kind of have two. I work in housing. I'm the chief of staff at New Jersey Housing Mortgage Finance Agency, and we're a little different than other state agencies. We generate our own funds, kind of like a bank. We have $4 billion portfolio. We do about $1 billion of multifamily lending a year, and while that's kind of different, it also allows us to be nimble. And what I really have always liked about housing, and what got me into it in the first place, is how intersectional it is. It's safety, it's environmental justice, it's affordability, it's food access and transit. And for so many domestic violence survivors, it's the reason why they can go or why they stay. And we know that people are healthier when they have a safe, decent home they can afford. And so it was mentioned in my bio, professionally, I'm most proud of the program we've launched the past couple of years, which I'm working with 5, 6, 7, 8 different health systems across the state of New Jersey for them to directly invest in affordable housing. And that's been kind of a silo breaking program that I've really enjoyed, because there's no reason that all these things should be separate. And I think nothing like COVID highlights the importance between, you know, housing and health. But personally, I just want to note something that Patricia said in the very beginning. I think sometimes it's like, look, this sucks and it's exhausting on a lot of days, but we should remember that it's kind of like, what is this all for? A lot has happened in the past few years, and there is an outcome to this, and there have been laws that talk about, you know, equal employment and record keeping and transition teams and background checks, and you know, there's still so much more, but the NDAs, the gag orders, it's not for nothing. And I'm so proud of all the women here who have played a part in that, and including myself. So
thank you. I think one of the things, Corin, you actually said it's hard to have the celebration without the struggle. And that was so common as you guys read the report in preparation for tonight. It was such a common thing, right? This struggle, that it shouldn't have to be this hard, that we're all generally in this arena because we want to contribute good things. We want to make society more equitable, safer, more accessible. And we oftentimes, and it resonates in the responses that we receive, the struggle is just so accepted that we have to do that in order to have some semblance of celebration and success. And I'm hoping that what we can highlight through our time together is that we shouldn't have to struggle so hard to do good things. That all of those efforts that we have to put into jumping all of those extra barriers and dealing with the misogynistic, racist comments and the culture that we're constantly, woven into, those are just distractions from us actually contributing our brilliance and our talent to make New Jersey, and in Corin's case, New York, better. And that shouldn't be acceptable. Yet when you said that, I noticed every single one of us nodded our head like, yep, we get it. That's so exactly true. If it comes easy, then we didn't work hard enough for it. And that's a false narrative that's being fed to us by power brokers, right? That we should be equal allies with less barriers in order to get good work done because it makes everybody look good and it makes everybody's life better. Yet somehow or another, we seem, particularly as younger women in the work, to have to work even harder. And I just want to say, I'm so thankful that you all continue to do the work and you hustle and you spend time on your evenings talking with us about things like this. And you make me hopeful that by having conversations like this, we can shift that reality for all of us, but also Crystal and so many of you mentor younger women, for women that are coming up behind us. And we all know that we stand on the shoulders of women who have done that for us. And so it's sort of, the expectation we're going to continue to reach down, but at one point in time, it'd be so nice to be able to reach this way instead of down and up. So I want to go into the reason why I asked that question is because one of the things that kept coming up also in some of our open-ended survey responses was a number of people saying, I'm no longer even involved in New Jersey government and politics. That because I experienced such rampant harassment or misogyny, or because I blew the whistle on a poorly behaving power broker, or my boss who was a mayor, or whatever the context was, I was either removed from those tables or I self-selected out because the burden of dealing in that culture was just too much. And so I wanted to really highlight for people who are watching us tonight that when you create scenarios that deny women opportunities to contribute to the public good, you deny all of the brilliant things you all have done from coming to fruition. And that shouldn't be acceptable. And so what I wanted to highlight was some of the comments that were shared in relation to that. One respondent said, I have experienced and witnessed sexism in general. Women being dismissed in meetings, sidelined, interrupted, overlooked. It doesn't rise to the level of physical or verbal abuse or harassment, but it's also worth noting in some context. Another one said, one mayor I worked for in a previous town actually said that I could not compare my salary to a male's because, and I quote, my salary was actually just pin money. And another respondent said, it's not all big stuff. It's the constant parade of minor comments, small lower back touches, felt on the aggregate. And the reality is that social change work is hard and it doesn't need to be made harder by the added barriers of misogyny and harassment. And I know so many friends and colleagues can relate to these statements. When the Star Ledger article broke in December 2019, I felt like there was a collective sense of like, we read it and we're like, yeah. But yet somehow or another, other folks who are doing this work right alongside us were shocked and amazed. I can't believe that this is happening right under my nose. How could this be the reality? So I want to talk about that. I want to hear your thoughts and experiences because a common theme of the overwhelming number of our respondents was, it's not always the things that would lead someone to call the cops. It's the day-to-day weight of dealing with people treating me inappropriately or dismissing me that ultimately leads me to either throw up my hands and say, I'm not doing this anymore, or just give up the fight and just deal with the structure. So however you guys want to handle that, I think this is an important part of the conversation because I know we have 96 people watching right now, but I I know who registered for this call, and I know there are a bunch of other folks that are probably like, yeah, I can name 72 times I was at a fundraiser and somebody did something A, B, or C, or said something A, B, or C. So let's talk about it. Katie.
I wanted to start off by saying that, you know, I and I'm sure that a lot of people can agree that if I had $1 for every time you were the only woman in the room, or someone said something that suggested, you know, you were beneath them, or they said something weird about my freckles, or, you know, just whatever it is, even if it's not inherently sexual and it just makes you feel small, but somehow it's not usually directed at the men, we would all be rich. And I could tell crazy stories all day, but we've done that, and now 500 other people have done that. And I think that what you highlighted is that it is important that it's not like me, Katie Brennan, hysterical woman who's like shouting to the rooftops. It's everybody. And it is easier to shrug it off a lot of the time, and put on a brave face. But I think that I know that we're going to talk a little bit about like what can you do later. And I get worried when we only talk about trainings up front, that sometimes that makes it these nebulous, faceless stories of like some really bad actor, right? And not all of these little tiny things that we deal with every day and that can end up being insidious. And, I think my favorite word in all of this is really accountability. And we can't just have like a one-day thing that someone's going to think is an inconvenience, and it has to be real-time actual accountability. It's similar to the conversation, I, as a white person, have with other white people about racism, that it's not like training and learning is just like not enough. You have to not be so fragile and call and be able to be told that you're racist, be able to be told that you're sexist, and then hear it, accept it, grow, be better. And I think that is that being a grown-up and having the hard conversation is just so seldom happening, where either other women or other men are calling it out, either right in the moment or off to the side. So I just ask everybody to be that person who has the uncomfortable conversation and to challenge somebody, because if you think that's awkward to tell somebody that, like, imagine how hard it is to live it every day. So I think that's kind of how we start. It's easy for someone to say it's not me because they've never, locked somebody in a hotel room or something, right? Like, there's probably something else you could have done better. And that's kind of where we need to get the conversation.
I really appreciate that. And this, we received so many open-ended responses that we couldn't possibly include all of them. But along this theme, Katie, you mentioned people commenting on your freckles. And there was a respondent, and what they responded actually really sat with me. It was someone who said, in the State House, men constantly pinch my cheeks and pat my head, right? So it's this belittling behavior that, like, would you do that to someone who didn't have the same physical appearances? It's altogether awkward. It's not an appropriate professional way to treat someone at all. And I think that so often women in particular get dismissed if what we're talking about isn't, to your point, Katie, they locked me in a hotel room. All of these other things we're told, like, suck it up, toughen up, that's the cost of doing business in New Jersey politics, but it wears at you. And you're right, if people would just say something when they see it happening, or if they would stop themselves from saying it or doing it, maybe, this narrative would be completely different. Tiffany, yeah. I think you were Crystal, go ahead.
So I was
Whoever.
What?
Go.
Okay. I was gonna, to both of your points, there is these constant kind of microaggressions, and it gets to the point where you start feeling gaslit, right? Like, you start wondering, wait, is this a big deal? Like, is this a thing? And these really minor infractions, like death by 1,000 cuts, you really start kind of doubting yourself. And even in preparation for this exact panel, like, I actually called Patricia and was just like, hey, this thing happened to me, like, is it appropriate to bring up? And I had to still seek validation of, is this a good example? because like there's things that happen around us that, you know, we're so socialized to take that, you know, when it happens, when it's not locked in a room, when it's not violent, like it's really hard to draw people's attention to it. So it's just like, it's things in, you know, the situation that I brought up to Patricia, it's just like going out to dinner with someone and then a few weeks later finding out, you know, you both work in politics and finding out they were talking about the, you know, what may or may not have happened at dinner, and you're finding out weeks later. And, you know, politics is based on relationships. So now spinning, trying to figure out, well, who is he talking to? Like, he's doing it during work hours, you know, trying to do this chart and then being like, is this even a big deal? And it took like Patricia and a friend of mine to point out, yes, you are a Black woman in politics. Any opportunity for someone to minimize your presence by over-sexualizing or just sexualizing you in general is an attempt to minimize you, to put you in your place. And a lot of, we'll talk about this, it's all about power. It's all about putting women in their place. So what was a few dinners then became this gossip narrative that I have no control over and wouldn't have any idea if a colleague hadn't mentioned it to me, right? I am a chief of staff, right? Like, I am in a leadership position when I'm at the State House, when I'm in Trenton. And, you know, if I go out to dinner or if I interact with you as a friend or outside of work hours, that interaction is consensual. You going and having locker room talk during work hours is not consensual, right? It's you trying to minimize me as a human being. And it's those little things, like, you know, you don't think about it as such this dangerous thing in politics, but it really, really is, because that's how, you know, the locker room talk and those narratives about women start. That's the seed, right? And it's just like that person put into danger my professional life for whatever reason he decided to, right? And I have no control over that because that's just the way it works, or seemingly, right? So it's like, I think women, and I think men too, need to think about these interactions. It's just like, when we are at work, we are at work. Have some decorum and respect, right?
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that we had that conversation earlier, because it really, this is the point of us having this conversation, that too often the data doesn't drive change, right? It's just a number on a paper. But when we can actually start to put life and breath into these little experiences, you can see even on this one panel how it adds up to be a whole pile of garbage that we have to deal with every day, which is unnecessary. Corin.
So when I first came forward, you know, I spoke about how my father wouldn't drink beers with evil men and the willingness of men to tolerate it. And I think with this question, looking at it from a macro lens and sort of taking an analytical standpoint, when you're reviewing the boys club itself, let the boys club itself preserve it in terms of the patriarchy. So right now, half of the population is used to being in the job pool that we are now entering, which allows for a larger range of talent. And so this boys club itself and this locker room talk actually preserves that, because we don't have access to it. They don't invite us out with them after work. Stop me if you disagree. Or if they do, they section you off from the herd, and which actually becomes a big anthropological play, right? So right now, this slew of really talented women, after an unprecedented millennia of being excluded from it, and with literary clues everywhere, and Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness led the precursor into seeing people viewing women as angry Black women, or the way that rape culture was portrayed in Jane Austen's novels, and all of these things, the courtyards where women could get their skin exposed to sunlight without having men look upon them. We are finally being integrated together. This boys club itself protects the competition, and they monetize their access to people in power, and they profit off of becoming gatekeepers to the men in power themselves, which sexism often makes us afraid of coming forward, particularly because of the volume of it. And I think that this is a truism that we need to look at with respect to this, that we're all afraid of being the Me Too girl, which is hard to unpack too, because in our inner monologues, we're referring to ourselves as girls. That can be discussed later. But we are assuming that at birth we're given a certain amount of chips with which we can use to defend ourselves and come forward, when really, by doing so, by thinking that we can't keep coming forward if it keeps happening, we are keeping the volume of intense discrimination and subjugation and disrespect a secret on their behalf. And I think the volume is now telling the story for us, so that people like Katie, who I see as a big hero, and people who come forward and put their personal lives at risk can now be insulated by the fact that there's science backing it up, there's statistics backing up. We can prove through qualitative and quantitative analysis that this is a truism that's happening, that when men sneak off and have talk together in conversations, not just sexually harassing us, but also discussing really important matters that relate to our jobs that we're not privileged to, that they often, through the microaggressions that Crystal brought up, come up in conversation, and we are shamed in the workplace for not being party to their boys club nonsense. We're excluded from our job. We're excluded from the information that empowers us to do well at work, because they're threatened by the quality that's coming in with women and the intellect that is now being presented in the field that was never seen before, that it took thousands of years to undo. And so I think that when we look at it and we start to dissect what the Boys Club does, managerial intervention can be really valuable. Lack of transparency in meetings, when men say, well, you didn't know that. Well, I wasn't there. How would I know that? You had this conversation at a golf club over drinks. How would I know that? The culture needs to be educated to say that, well, if she wasn't there, she wasn't there. Either invite her, be participatory, or be respectful. And we can utilize this opportunity right now to get on the same page, because right now there's a lot of not being on the same page, in addition to the malignancy that goes into the sexual harassment aspect of what we go through on a day-to-day basis in politics.
I think one of the things you just said about we're not all on the same page is something that we're going to get to further in our discussion, which is the idea that, like, we are just living such either intentional or not different realities from so many of our male identified colleagues in this work, and that shows out in the statistics as well. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to this particular frame? Go ahead, Tiffany.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, just kind of with how often it happens, I wanted to talk a couple of points about that. One is just like, as I was living through my campaign and my experience, I don't even think, like, as I was living through it day to day, I knew things that were happening were wrong, and that shouldn't be happening, and that it was likely because I was a woman, but I just didn't have time to deal with it every day. I was trying to run a congressional campaign. I was networking with constituents, with lawmakers. I couldn't afford at the time to make anybody unduly upset about my complaints. I mean, I've had one member of an advocacy organization, I guess I'll qualify it as, say to me that he would like to tell me what he'd like me to do for him, but it was inappropriate to discuss in front of a company. And in that moment was strong enough, because it was so offensive to say something, to actually say something. But when I made my complaint to the party and my bigger concern, one of the things that was said to me was that, well, why didn't you come to us sooner? If you were having these problems, why didn't you come to us the first time? And my response was, if I came to you every time I was sexually harassed or experienced misogyny on my campaign or from party officials, I wouldn't be able to do my job. Like, I think that reigns true for women in just about any career. When I was a server, if I called out every time someone touched me inappropriate in the alley, I would never make any money because that's all I would do with my shift all day. So those things, and I think I didn't even realize like the depth of what was happening to me and the impact that it was having on my ability to operate my campaign effectively until long after I had dropped from my campaign and actually wrote out everything that happened. And that's when I realized just how much it was holding me back from being able to do the things that I needed to do, that it wasn't my inability to run an effective congressional campaign. It was all this other stuff that was happening to me because I was a woman.
And I think one of the things that you said that I think is also, as someone who spent a considerable amount of time in my service industry, that relationship between the customer is doing something inappropriate, yet when you go to management, the customer is always right? So you should grin and bear it. You should just walk away. You can have someone else pick up the table if you need to, right? There's this idea that we have a responsibility to bear the burden of this behavior in order to help the establishment be successful. And it's very similar to what I think we experience in politics. This idea of you can't speak up against that person. That person is a high-level donor. That person is a power broker. That person helps create the party line. That person is a consultant. And so there's always a reason why we should just grin and bear it. And it's that common thread that we are taught from when we are little. And it just translates into all these different career paths for us. And it's coming to a head in the purpose of this conversation, talking about our experiences in politics, but it's such a universally shared reality for so many women. Sabine, did you want to add?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Patricia. There's a lot of great points that were brought up today, and I echo everyone's. And I think the common thread that I've seen and I'm hearing is that as soon as you start your career and well into your career, you will undoubtedly face harassment or misogyny or judgments of some kind. And unfortunately, as you age and go up the pole of success, those judgments change. For instance, when I was an intern, when I first came to Trenton, I was an intern. About 7 years later, when I came back as a contract lobbyist, everyone still thought I was an intern. And 5 years into my career, people still assume I'm the intern. Or they assume I'm not the head contract lobbyist on the account. Or my favorite, I have a very, very white, very, very tall husband who sticks out in the crowd. My favorite is when I bring him to new work events, everyone assumes he's the contract lobbyist. And he gets so excited about my work, he starts talking, and I'm like, no, he's the chemist. So it's a lot of these assumptions that kind of take over our careers and blur the lines between personal and professional. Now, in politics, and especially in New Jersey politics, that line is already blurred. You go to drinks and discuss bills, you have meetings in bars, you go golfing, you have meetings in offices. It's really a full spectrum kind of job. But I think because of that relationship and that dynamic, a lot of times people mistake friendliness or professionalism or just participation or forcing yourself into the room as an invitation to allow others to diminish you. And that could be in a hug that lingers too long, a kiss on the cheek that's just a little too close for my taste, literally, or a hand that slid down your back a little too far, or beyond. But I think people generally recognize, hopefully, that that's not okay. But I think the real danger is that we have a society that's built on protecting this kind of dynamic, whether it's not pointing out Katie's freckles or touching Crystal's hair or touching my hair or asking about my skin or asking where I'm really from, which is always New York, by the way. And so I think it's just a lot of things of, why do we have to talk about my background, my breast size, when you don't ask about my colleague's pant size? And another thing too, it invalidates you as a power broker in politics, frankly, because it diminishes your reputation. You know, when you are diminished to just your eyeshadow color or types of shoes you wear, or the fact that you don't dress girly enough, or you're too girly, or whatever they deem that day or that hour, the constant struggle is about perception. And if you diminish me to just a characteristic, you're not relying on me for my brain. And if the other person would just kind of let me talk first, and then what, judge me later, that's fine. But at least let's have a conversation and both start here. I think women, when they enter the room, even if they're up here, another guy enters, and it's just automatically at this dynamic. I will say that there are some men that obviously recognize this and push against the grain. But unfortunately, it's so ingrained in us that a lot of these microaggressions or little examples of, oh, that's a really great color, you should wear that more often, or that's okay. But when you start saying, well, you should really smile in meetings, or maybe you should just act like this, or maybe don't mention your husband, or whatever it is that people are saying, and it really, it creates a divide and creates barriers to our success. And I think as soon as we start to deconstruct these tiny little issues that build up over time, and like I said, the profession is such that we blur the lines all the time, but we still are professionals at the end of the day. And I think that's something that folks need to remember a little bit more closely, because women have to watch themselves. We have to watch what we say. We have to watch what we wear. I adjust what I wear. I adjust my makeup considering who I'm with. I adjust if I'm going to wear hoops that day or not, whatever it is. I adjust if I'm going to wear pants, a higher shirt, often a turtleneck. Doesn't even do the job done. But, we have to assess every move. And that's exhausting on top of trying to navigate the complications of the legislative process and politics in general. So men, they don't have to have those conversations. They don't have to have those inner dialogues. They don't have to call friends and confirm whether mistreatment is deserved or not. But we do, and that's a problem. But having conversations like this is just so important to that discussion, because so many women have approached me and my colleagues, everyone, just saying, I have that happen to me. I didn't realize it was such a problem, but I also was really uncomfortable about it. So now what do we do?
And to Sabine's point, I actually created a group. Like I call it's like there's two separate groups. It's Brown Girls Who Brunch. Sabine knows what I'm talking about. And like Brown Girls and board games. In the pre-COVID world, it was literally Oh
no! Later.
But like pre-COVID, those were two get-togethers that I specifically, and some of my other colleagues in politics who are Black and women of color, created these safe spaces to talk about these very things that Sabine has mentioned. Like, we have to create safe spaces to revalidate each other and know that we have each other's backs. So when we go back out there, we are buttressed a little bit more. And it's so often where you are getting these little microaggressions. And, when I first started, to Sabine's point, I definitely tailored what I was wearing, my makeup, how I wore my hair. And it got to a point where I just didn't want to do that anymore. And I stopped. And for me, that was a decision that I made. And I'm not going to say it's easy, right? But it became like, all right, bet, try it, right? I got so tired that I just, in a way, got confrontational. And it's like, I need you to understand that how I dress, my makeup, my clothes, my hair, I'm not doing it for you at all. I'm doing it for me. And I think there needs to be that conversation in the old boys club and I think to Corinne's point, like, this isn't about you anymore. We are on this stage, and we shouldn't have to have this extra psychic load of making ourselves smaller and fit in your spaces where you're allowed to be mediocre and exceed. Because in politics, more so than anywhere else, men, controversial statement, but true, especially white men, fail up.
I was just going to say failing up.
You're getting some good comments in the
they fail up. You have to work 2 or 3 times as hard, and if you make a mistake, the pitfall is so much greater than your white colleague.
You're a problem. We're just going to get you a better job.
Somewhere higher, right. More paid.
Get you a no-show job with benefits.
Right.
So we're gonna get to that point in a second, and I want to say that what you all are saying, even about like how we physically show up in a space, is something that Marissa and I, in our job at the coalition, we so often talk about. That predominantly women's bodies are for consumption, our brains are not for contribution. And so that's what's happening. Even when you are, to the points you guys all raised, when you are invited to the bar for those drinks after work, it's not because they want to hear what you have to think about or what you think about the policy issues. They want to look at you. They want to consume you, but they don't want to actually have you contribute. And as soon as you start contributing, or as soon as you start fighting back or pushing back, then all of a sudden you're excluded. So like, you're invited as long as you're the nice girl who plays by the rules, and the rules are you're there for us to look at, but I don't really want to hear what you have to think.
Or they consume you less if you are somehow attached to another man, right?
That's
like
true.
If you're somehow attached to, or have the blessing of a man, almost just like when you get catcalled and you say, well, I got a boyfriend or I'm married, they stop, right?
Someone's baby or someone's baby.
Right. Like, my agency doesn't matter unless I'm connected to someone else and they are somehow protecting me. And then you get the respect, right? Like, and it's been a very interesting dynamic, and it's something that I've seen as someone who has a really supportive boss, that like the way that he treats me in public and I interact with him, interesting enough, sets like a precedent where a lot of things where I'll see other female colleagues have to go through, they don't do that with me. Right. And it's really interesting when you process it, because it's like, is it because of me and you're respecting me? Well, no, because you probably just see me as another Black woman, but this white guy's behind me.
Yeah. He's validating you, right?
He's validating
your existence in the space.
I want to add one thing. Chuck, my white man boss, also fantastic. Sets a really good tone.
Shout out to good white bosses.
but what Chris was saying, and Corin about being someone's baby, I think sometimes when we talk about, oh, you need to step up, you need to call it out, you need to help people, that's not what we mean. Of, oh, I don't need like a protective man overlord. Like, that is not what I'm asking for. It is different. Are you willing to get out of the way? Like, step up, step back? Are you willing to lose any of your power to let somebody else have power? Are you willing to put yourself on the line? Like, that's what we're talking about here, not like some,
savior.
Yeah.
Savior, daddy.
We want you to model what it's like to be a good human.
Katie. Because unfortunately, I think we're clarifying that, because unfortunately, to Crystal's point, sometimes your success is based off of the white powerful men or powerful men that are able to boost you up. And in my firm, I have 2 male principals, and I'm lucky that they give me that platform and that support, because frankly, if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be able to do all these things. And that was as a empowered little brown lady, that was hard for me to swallow, but it is what it is, and I think we have to create these support systems, between older and younger women, between older men and younger women, people that are equal. It's all across the board, and it's not going to be successful if everyone doesn't help propel each other forward.
So I want to say, Danielle Dunn just asked in the comment section if we could do this every month. And I do feel like we have so much that we could cover, that we could. And I am really conflicted, because part of me is just saying, like, I'm just going to pour a glass of wine and we are just going to sit here and do this all night. But I also know that we do have press on the line, and I don't want to deny them an opportunity to ask questions. And I do want us to get through some of the other really important findings. So I'm going to awkwardly transition us because I am incredibly awkward. And also because I'm conflicted, because I'm like, girls, I just want to sit here and do this for like the next 7 hours. But one of the things that, continues to come up also is, well, if it happened to you and it was so bad, why didn't you tell anybody? Why didn't you do anything? And, the respondents had a lot of really interesting points to this. And there was a theme that there were themes that were even like frustration, but also like a sense of resignation of like, it's just not even worth it. There's nothing, there's no point in doing anything about it. And one respondent said, if I'm being brutally honest, I'd probably not report it. I have zero faith that the outcome would be positive. It never is. Even if someone feigns support for the victim, they're now considered difficult. It's still so much easier to sweep it under the rug. I'm just being honest. And that qualitative piece of feedback really pairs with the data we received. That 28% of respondents said they told a colleague what happened to them, 24% told a friend, and 21% told no one. And when we asked respondents why they didn't report, 18% said they feared retaliation, 17% said they didn't think reporting would help, 15% said they feared public or social backlash, 12% said they feared not being believed, and 10% felt that the position of the harasser could influence results of reporting. One respondent said, there's a lot of retribution for speaking up against being treated differently as a woman. I believe speaking up to my boss against another employee cost me my job. So many women know this and avoid doing much about it unless they have clout. Another one said, misogyny is prevalent everywhere in New Jersey politics. It's discouraging that as a young staffer, I already know so many stories about young women who have been touched, harassed, belittled, and raped, and nothing is done about it. And another one said, it's all about avoiding lawsuits rather than preventing a culture that tolerates sexual harassment of women. Reporting is pointless as the current procedures just ensure a target is placed on the women that do report it. Witnessed several men that had been investigated for sexual harassment be promoted to management positions, creating a hopeless position for women. So let's talk about those loose reporting structures of campaigns and political parties. The understood expectation is that we toe the line for the power brokers and those in their close circle. The reality is that our success in this field is often in the hands of powerful, mostly white men who serve as gatekeepers to other people with influence, to donors, to contracts, to party lines, etc. And it's no wonder because of that so many people stay quiet. Recently, the state Democratic Party announced training requirements and reporting procedures. The Republican nominee for governor many months ago unveiled his campaign's anti-sexual harassment policy, and he appointed a well-respected former state senator to serve as the compliance officer. Tiffany, you're working with legislators and a committee of stakeholders on legislation that pulls these processes out from under the authority of partisan leadership. So let's discuss it. What our survey reveals, and what some of your own lived experiences have already revealed, is that the parties haven't done a good job of self-policing on issues relating to misogyny and sexual misconduct within their ranks. So what are we going to do about it? What do you guys think about some of the plans that have already been introduced? Are we doing enough? Is it too soon? Is it too late? Have at it. Wallflowers.
To give some historical context, I do work in New York now, but I was a well-entrenched Jersey Politico, and I'm still on the board of Blue Wave New Jersey and work with women here as much as I possibly can. I do feel that there is a risk of retribution, but the retribution and the shape that it takes is so difficult to define. When I wrote my piece in 2017, I believe, and without trying to put my finger exactly on it, that there were people that, even though I named no one, believed that that story, even though it was really an amalgam of several different complaints that I'd received based off of the first one, was about them. And they had that sort of, I bet you think this song is about me guilt complex, and they couldn't really name it, but my work environment became strange. It was difficult to get into access, and I wasn't getting invited to political events as often as I once was. And when I was there, there was an undertone of cruelty and hushed tones. I got a few prank calls that I couldn't really assign. And there was a matter of a promotion that I wanted, didn't know if I'd get, but without being able to actually define what was happening, I had to make a decision whether or not I would escalate that further, because this was in response to me trying to defend other women. My advocacy has never really been about me. It's been about trying to help other women, like drag them into the light with me. And I had a very difficult decision whether I would sue for a hostile work environment. And for so long, I've kind of viewed like Katie, honestly, as a 1 and 2 situation. And we're sort of two sides of a very difficult coin. And I feel that we both made correct decisions with how we did. And I said, I have a very high demand, low supply skill set being a fundraiser. I have relationships in New York. I can just let it go and move on and have a political life somewhere else. And I targeted Andrew Stewart Cousins because she's amazing, and I fangirled for her, and I knew that that was a really promising way to sort of go after Donald Trump, who I also believe is possibly a rapist, and I wanted to support that, and I found a new way, and I had to exit because of this undefinable, very difficult, hostile environment that I felt was being presented with having a very difficult time being able to prove it. Being a recent divorcee, hiring a lawyer would have been extremely difficult. And I feel that I did the right thing, but then there are other people who have high-skilled jobs, but maybe there's more of a supply who wouldn't be able to just jump out and get a campaign finance gig, and they have to take other routes. But the cost is extremely high right now, and I think what we're all trying to do together is we're trying to make that price of coming forward no longer borne by the people who have to come forward, because there is a social cost to coming forward. People do look at you sideways. They do question your integrity and your honesty and your ability to put an entire thing. They bring you through such a painful process. And so I think that's why. But I think right now, as we have volume and all of this, it's a safer environment to do so. And we also are able to build out the infrastructure in order to do so. We've leveled the playing field, and now we have to figure out ways to coach women to come forward in a way that minimizes their individual social costs, because not everyone can brandish a fiery sword like Katie, and not everyone can pick up and leave the state for several months like I can. And not everyone is in that position of privilege, and not everyone has a well-meaning power broker in these weird political silos that we have in New Jersey to protect them from what's going on. It's scary to come forward, and I think we have to be the solution in doing so by building out statistically significant mechanisms that are tested and true. And we also need to look at the structure in terms of how 1099 employment works with the party, because you don't answer to the same people. So if I am a consultant and that consultant is someone else's consultant, and that consultant who doesn't answer to who I answer to harasses me, where do I bring that? How do I get my truth told in the lowest social, financial, spiritual health cost that I can have possible? And these are the things that we have to look at, because a fundraiser is not a housing specialist, is not a chief of staff, is not a candidate for public office. But the cost isn't just to us and as individuals, it's also the cost to the constituents that would be served so well by this increased level of talent, by the inclusivity of women.
I 100% agree with all of that. And I want to give Tiffany a chance to talk about the work that she's doing on the legislation in New Jersey, because the other thing that's very frustrating, I think, I'm going to loop you in, Marissa, and just say, like, Marissa and I, we work on issues relating to sexual violence like every day. It is our full-time job. And so often when I look at women like you and the women who filled out this survey, to your point, Cory, Katie is a housing specialist, and she's had to become an expert on how messed up the systems are because of her lived experience. And like, survivors shouldn't have to take on the responsibility of fixing the messed up systems, because you have an entire identity and job and career path and life that's different and more robust than your survivorship, yet it becomes this work that we take on, because if you're not going to take it on, who the hell is? And so, Katie, and the work that you've been doing after all of your stuff went public has really been transformative for a lot of the foundational stuff here in New Jersey. But Tiffany's work is currently like a little more on the sidelines because we're still working out the technical language of the bill and dealing with COVID, which is going to create huge fiscal concerns for the big plans that we have. So I wanted to give you, Tiffany, an opportunity to talk a little bit about your experiences and why you think some of the legislative remedies we're considering might be good options for power brokers to strongly consider.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I agreed to serve on the task force initially is because I think we need to make sure that this legislation is as strong as possible to prevent this from happening on future campaigns. And given my experience, I'm hopeful that I can contribute significantly to that. Particularly with the retaliation we mentioned, there was not only retaliation against me for starting to tell people what had happened to me, but also retaliation against people who supported me after I came out. And that's long term, and it continues, like, it's slight things that you're, to Corinne's point, that you can't really tell are necessarily retaliation for that specific thing, but it definitely feels that way. With the legislation that we're working on, like Patricia said, between COVID and power outages, I'm still waiting on the second draft of the bill. And I'm really glad that we're doing legislation. Another big issue with my story that I have is how my complaint, which wasn't even like a written formal complaint, was investigated by someone who was supposed to be an independent investigator but was being paid by the party. The report that was shared publicly was how much of the report was determined by the party. So it made it really difficult for any truth telling. I didn't even feel comfortable enough to participate in the investigation because it did not feel like it was truly independent. So moving that investigation outside of the party structure and into an office at ELEC is what we're working on right now, ideally. One of the things that I'm still struggling with the legislation, and hopefully it'll be in the next draft, is exactly what we're doing with the information after we investigate. And there is a report. I would love for there to be the option that if I'm going to run for office on any level again, I have an opportunity to protect the people on my staff from people who are known to harass women. In particular, in my situation, the person who was harassing me had done this to other candidates going back multiple cycles. And there had been complaints to the party. In my opinion, I shouldn't have had to ever even interact with that person by the time I started my congressional campaign. So finding ways to keep women safe, because it's not even just about keeping me safe as the candidate, but all of the women who are volunteering on my campaign, my staff, my policy advisors. As a politician, I want my volunteers, my staff, my grassroots to feel as comfortable as possible participating in the political system. This is a threat. There's a lot of threats to our democracy right now. This is one of the threats to our democracy. Excluding women, forcing women out of the political realm through violence, whether that's harassment, rape, sexual comments, all of that is violence against women. Want to make sure that we're able to actually have a preventive barrier, and I can protect my staff and women in politics in general.
And I want to thank you for taking this on. And I want to say that, we didn't really intend to talk about it too robustly tonight, but again, it's in the full report. But what we found is, as we talked about reporting, a lot of people didn't even know where to report. And that's not an accident, because if you're involved in party politics, there often is not a formal place to report, right? These are loosely structured organizations. Campaigns are sort of like fly-by-night operations. People are swooping in and swooping out. I mean, it really is like the West Wing. And it's not, I know I'm doing this to Josh, Corin. I know you and I both got a thing there. It's not always, there is no place to report. So when people say, why didn't you report? It's sort of like, well, who the hell do I report to? Mm-hmm. And what we found, though, was that of all of the people who responded, the people who knew where to report the most were our colleagues who actually work in the state legislature. They knew where they could report if the bad behavior had happened while they were in the business of doing work in the legislature. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that recently they updated their policies, they facilitated training on it, their reporting structure is posted on their webpage. And so I can't speak to how well those investigations go, but I can say from at least you know where to report, there was a general increased level of awareness of like, there is some structure in place. And what I think, you know, Tiffany and Corin and Katie, what some of your experiences have highlighted is that in the absence of there being any kind of structure or policy in writing, the power brokers control what happens next. Did you want to add to that, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things, starting with what Corin had said about the 1099s. It's like, yeah, oh, is it the coordinated campaign or the campaign or the nonprofit or just, it's like, who cares? You know, there has to be a sensical way for it to work. And that's why, you know, what Tiffany is doing and so many others is really important of like, we can figure this out. I think there's sometimes we talk about like doom and gloom, but I'm delusionally optimistic, I think, or else I wouldn't still be standing here today, or delusionally persistent maybe. And I you know, there was a comment in the side about other states, and you know, and I know there's also a comment in the report about the training, and it's Corin might get a kick out of this, my Hudson County pal. One of my very favorite rumor that swirled around after it came forward was that I was from a deep bench political family and that the courthouse was named after me.
I unmuted so I could cackle.
like the Supreme Court justice. It's like, I grew up in the Midwest. like my parents, like, no, yeah.
I heard that one.
Oh, Katie's freezing. Look at how joyous she looks while we're talking about these horrible things. Oh, you were freezing, Katie. So we were just living for you.
Yeah, no, just that my internet connection is unstable. Yeah, same. But I grew up in the Midwest, and it's you know, and I've lived in a lot of different states before I came to New Jersey, and it's not the same everywhere. And that doesn't mean that it's good necessarily everywhere, but even like Chicago has quite, I moved to New Jersey from Chicago. Chicago has quite the reputation for its politics. Like the cheek kisses, that is uniquely New Jersey. Uniquely New Jersey. Like there's like things can be different. And I believe that we can make changes. And you know, Ritu in the report said herself that training is the first step. It is the first step. So I'm glad that we're doing that. I'm really glad that we're getting reporting mechanisms, because that's a huge problem. But I think again, it's okay, bystanders, interventions, because you know we've gotten to a point where it's maybe popular for a lot of people to say that they hear us, they believe us. It's like, hey, well, if you believe us and you're not doing anything, then you are the problem. So I need you to put yourself out on a limb and be willing, again, are you willing to put your own power at risk? If someone comes to you with an incident and you allow it to go unchecked, or that person is still there, they're still floating around, and even if you know they're bad, but you're not doing anything actively to stop it, you are the problem. And so I think again and again, training and reporting, but then ultimately I need the state party to illustrate that they will hold people accountable.
And I think one of the things you just said about like, if you're not doing something, right, you can be the good guy, so to speak. There's actually a comment that we included in the report where someone said the biggest problem is that they all think they're one of the good ones. They're not one of the good ones. They're just one of the ones. They think they're heroes because they don't hit women or verbally abuse them, but we need to raise the bar. It's the whole culture. It's the boys club. It's constantly feeling excluded. I don't know how to get them to change if they can't see that what they're doing is wrong. And so there is sort of, right, so if what happened to us doesn't rise to the level of like, I need to call the police, then we are hysterical that we're making these things up and we should just suck it up. And if they're not literally beating us in public, then they're good guys. Like, we can't have it all of these ways at the same time. And I think that's what these 500 people who responded to this survey are really highlighting, that like the entire narrative is so flawed. The expectations for all of us are so wrong, that we should endure and that they should get kudos because they don't punch you in the face while you're out at the bar. Like, it's just, that is sort of the where the bars have been set are sort of that grossly inequitable. I want to talk about that inequity and have an opportunity to share one of my favorite comments, which I think will be some of the most fun part of our conversation tonight. So talking about the inequities and the differences between respondents that identified as male and those who identified as female. One of the survey, or some of the survey questions we asked, allowed respondents to give us their beliefs. So it wasn't just about what happened to you, but what do you think is happening around you in general? And one of the questions was about the prevalence of harassment in politics. And 13% of male identified respondents indicated that they believed harassment is extremely prevalent. And 46% of female identified respondents indicated that harassment is extremely prevalent. And then we even saw misogynistic comments and harassing comments in the open-ended responses to our survey. One respondent said, "This entire survey and narrative is a fallacy and a farce. Many of these women are ruining men's lives and careers based on hearsay, and that is unacceptable." And then my favorite response is, "Women who use sexuality as a tool to get ahead, then complain when they get sexually harassed," and sexually harassed is in quotes, "have nothing to complain about. The difference between sexual harassment and flirting is often based on the looks of the harasser, and that's just not fair. Feel free to print all of this if you can handle the criticism." So not only did we print it, we're going to discuss it. I recently co-facilitated a training for some partisan operatives, and while most of the men in attendance were clear allies, also eager for change, a few still articulated concerns like, "Oh, now you're saying I can't even hug my friends?" and insinuating that women can't tell the differences between a friendly hug and one that lingers too long and inappropriately. So let's discuss. 64% of our female identified respondents indicated that they'd experienced some form of sexual harassment. Is it all in our heads? Are we all out of our minds? Unable to appropriately distinguish between friendliness, flirting, and appropriate conduct? Have at it, ladies. Crystal is ready. Look at Chris. Oh my God, all of you are like,
Crystal, go ahead, my friend.
Let me say this loud for the people in the back. We do not exist for you. I do not exist for you. No woman exists for you and your pleasure and your consumption. If I am being friendly, if any woman is being friendly, it's because you are a human being, and generally you are taught to be polite and kind to other human beings. The real issue is somehow thinking that you're extra special, because the thing is, you're not. You're not, right? Like, you are also a fellow human being. You are a colleague. We are working, or we are just interacting in our days. And, you know, to Sabine's earlier point, if I'm being nice to you, it doesn't mean that I'm flirting with you. And I have real questions about the men and sometimes women, right? Because that's not something we've touched on yet. The internalized patriarchy, they cannot tell the difference. It's not us women who can't tell the difference. It's the men making those comments that can't tell the difference, right? Like, that's, thank you, persons who put that in there.
Because you are infantilizing to say men can't control themselves.
Right, right.
Infantilizing.
Right, like, so, you know, it's the same idea that if you see my shoulder, oh Lord, right? Like, this is 2020, right? If you can't handle a woman existing, then maybe you need to stay at home. Maybe maybe this executive order that put us at home is the best thing for you. Maybe that's what you needed. And I know I'm kind of going off the rip now, I'm being a little less decorum myself, but it's that type of behavior and thought process that leads us there, right? Like, take responsibility for yourself. Women aren't ruining men's lives. Men are being held accountable for all the behavior that they've not been held accountable for. Because we are now reaching, and it's not critical mass yet, but we are now reaching a point where women are clawing their way up to be taken seriously. And, you know, a broken clock is right 2 times a day, and we get listened to and justice is served. That's not ruining life. Ruining someone's life is constantly touching them. It is constantly unwanted behavior and comments. It's assault. It's, you know, minimizing their workload. It's mansplaining. It is undermining them every step of the way. That's ruining someone's life, right? That's what people need to understand. What we're talking about and what this report's talking about is justice. It's accountability. And if accountability makes you nervous, if accountability and justice makes you scared, it makes you want to victim blame, then you need to look yourself in the mirror. And you know what? Maybe you should be scared, because this report's for you.
Woo! And let's talk about, Katie, you talked about this earlier in a different context about privilege. Like, privilege feels like when other people start getting justice, you're losing out. And so our report still bears that most women are not reporting the level of frequency with which they're harassed. So now that we're even starting to report or talk about it a little bit, all of a sudden we're making it all up. And it's like, you know, we're ruining people's lives. Like, the truth would really ruin people's lives. And what's that? The truth? You can't handle the truth. Like, I feel like that should be the title of the report, actually.
Marissa, get on it.
And I would joke to her that I'm like, there's a lot, and people are like, oh, attention, money, and also there are way better, way cheaper, way less taxing ways to go about any of those activities. Like, I promise you it's not that. What were you going to say, Sabine? You got all ready.
Oh boy, I'm
gonna tag you in.
Yeah, just so many things. One, if anyone thinks that this is fun for us, oh boy, I hope they've read a book before to know what like actual fun or hobbies look like. Like, I love these ladies and I'm all amped up on like female power and whatever, and this is great to talk, but we're doing this because we have to, right? We're doing it because there haven't been any other forums or opportunities for us to come forward collectively and say, oh my God, this has been happening to you all of your life, and now it's just amplified because we're in politics and all the people in power are white men. Oh my God. We're doing this because people's stories were hearsay because people were too afraid to say it to more than 1 or 2 people. Now we're operating in a reality where we're just being exposed for what we are. People are just seeing what's been done. The only people that have anything to worry about are the ones that can question their behavior. And if you feel like if you read that article, and if you, like, Corinne, to your point, so many men thought that this song was about them, you know, maybe it wasn't, but maybe you should do some self-reflection. If you read that article and you're if you're hiding that article from your significant other or wife, or you know, maybe you're part of the problem of perpetuating this kind of behavior. Now, there are, of course, many men that don't do things like this. And this report is just to kind of let them know how to be a helpful ally as we progress towards anything, any semblance of transitioning towards balance of the genders, really, because we're not asking for more. I know I'm certainly not. I'm just asking to just be in the room. And then I'm going to feel it out, and then I'm going to ask for more. And that's my process. You know, we're not demanding anything that we're not entitled to. And frankly, women know the retribution is real. I mean, either your face gets plastered all over the news, or people feel like they knew your story, or there's gossip in the halls of the annex or the state house. Either way, you're not in control of your narrative. So women have to, or I should say people that feel the need to come forward are put into that position because there was no other possible routes for them to take. And you're putting yourself in a really significantly challenging, at the very least, position. And, you know, you don't do that lightheartedly. And the last thing I will also say is there's a lot of people who made comments of, oh, I can't touch you anymore, I can't hug you anymore now that I'm participating in this working group, or I have to treat you differently. And I'll just tell them that's actually the issue. Just treat me how you treat your brother, honestly. We're friends, that's fine. Treat me how you treat my male colleague or counterpart. That's all I want. Nothing more, nothing less. That's all we're asking for, is just enough. Not even a lot. Just the bare minimum of human dignity. That's about it. Okay.
I love it.
Who else wants to have at it?
Go first, Tiffany.
So-
I have a game I want to play. So.
Okay, good. I think this hearsay, when I read that quote, the hearsay really like smacked me in the face, because when I had figured out what was happening to me and I started talking to other women around the party, and they all had pretty much the same experience with the same individual that I had. And like I felt very alone when it was just happening to me. But like, as I was talking to these women, we were trading notes on the same exact experience that we all had. And so it's not that it's hearsay as much as like a validation of what you're experiencing. Like, yes, this is not just me. There's not something wrong with me that it's happening to me. It's something wrong that's happening consistently to other women in the party or in the political space. And I just like the idea of calling it hearsay when we're supposed to be believing women is this really uncomfortable dichotomy. And also, I don't know about other people, but I assume if men feel like I'm flirting with them, it is probably my best attempt to escape an uncomfortable conversation than it is in any way retribution, or any way like feeling the same feelings as they do. Usually it's just like, oh my God, this is uncomfortable, I need to get out. And I think that might be misconceived as us flirting, when in reality it's just a safety mechanism.
I was muted. Corin.
Yeah, so I want to play a game, if everyone will indulge me. Excuse me, there's a fruit fly. So if I would like to have everyone take their best guess, potentially in the chat or the Q&A area or wherever that's popping up. I can't see it. Facebook Live, because I want you to guess what was said to me, because I think you can. But a little backstory. So I was doing a fundraiser for about 250 people, and I had to spend the entire night working really hard, introducing elected officials to participants. And then afterwards, the guys, they all went out. They didn't invite me. I guess they assumed that I didn't want to go with them. They might have been right. So I ended up wanting to go get a burger. I was famished, and I was wearing a pair of earrings that I really love. They are shaped in a way that it's for an animal that is based on antiquity for strength, and I really enjoy wearing them. And this man that I'd worked with had said, can I tag along? I'm hungry too. And I said, sure. I was senior to him. So we go to this bar, famously known for another sexual predator getting taken down. And I was sitting at the table, and then we were later joined by another man that I worked with who was senior to both of us. I was sitting there, and he made an off-color remark. And is everyone paying attention? Can people say yes in the chat? Are you listening? I'm going to cross yes. Yes. So he called attention, and he asked if people had seen my earrings. Can you see my earrings? Ooh. Do you think that you can guess what that man said to me? He made an off-color joke about my knockers, as you probably are all guessing. And obviously, I was dumbfounded. But I think in the fact, right, thank you, Carol. I think in the fact that you can guess what this man said to me, that you can, without hesitation, within moments, know exactly what was said, proves the prevalence because it is so normalized by you. And I would just like to take the opportunity to call BS on the people that are saying that they don't think this is happening because they were able to guess what was said to me that night. It's there. It's built into our architecture. It's written into our novels. It's all around us all of the time. And in that moment, I didn't know whether or not I wanted to come forward, obviously. I just was angry. My friend who came to join us, who was senior to both of us, wanted to take the lead from me, and he, I think, needed guidance as to how to be a good ally, which I think we're all working on right now. And this kind of normalized behavior where he felt he was being jocular it minimized my position. It minimized what I was going about. It was off hours. It was in dark corners, which so much of political life is. And I think that he felt that he was just making a joke, but very much at my expense. And the social cost, again, is what we always are picking up the tab as women for all of these interactions. And I think it's very clear that everyone knows this is happening. And the harsh reality is, since we're able to guess what happens in every turn, and we can almost see every scene play out, is that what we're really trying to come forward and say is that we need to take a long look at ourselves and realize what we've defined as normal, because they think saying something about knockers when I'm just trying to be a lioness is appropriate, and it certainly is not. And in these instances, I think the volume, it speaks for itself. The fact that so many people are able to guess what was said, the fact that we can tell a story before we've even heard all the details, is enough proof in of itself. And any person who says that it's not happening is probably in a desperate need for some time reviewing how they view the world in and of itself, because it's clear.
I think what you just gave us an opportunity to see is exactly that. It was amazing watching the answers come in on the chat. Like, it was there was no hesitancy. Everyone was like, knockers, knockers, knockers. Everybody knew. And also, like, it's so cliched at this point. Like to get a new routine. Like, how can this
be creative?
Like, do something else. Like, stop harassing us. Let's all get down to the good work that we have to do. And there's some real irony, I think, for Marissa and I, as we're running through all of these responses, that, you know, we're conducting a survey around misogyny and harassment in politics, and we have a comment that threatens us by saying, basically, like, print this if you dare. And now what? So we've printed it and we've talked about it. Now what? And then also for them to deny the prevalence of everything that we've been talking about and continue that false narrative that, like, we are making this up. It can't possibly be this true. And I'm hoping, and based off of the feedback that we're getting in the chat and stuff today, and by the number of responses that we got to even having this conversation, that people are ready to look at that hard truth, that they are, you know, when we launched this survey, as has happened with a couple surveys that we've launched, we've kind of crossed our fingers, like, if we get 100 responses, we'll be really lucky, because nobody likes to talk about these issues. And as we're seeing, many people have never talked about them or shared their experiences before. We had 125 responses in 24 hours to this survey. So, like, there is a great desire for people who have had these experiences in government and politics to share their stories. And we know that this is just one industry. This happens to be what it is we're focusing on right now. But we did at NJ CASA hold a series of sexual harassment forums with the Division on Civil Rights last fall. And we talked about sexual harassment in the workplace and places of public accommodation. And those stories were just as harrowing. And many of those people were also not protected. They were domestic workers. They were folks who were non-documented. And people were wielding their white power and control over people who had very little recourse than we all have, right? I mean, our survey respondents, to Marissa's point at the beginning, have so much privilege and so much access, and still we're not telling people, we're not reporting, we're not getting people held accountable. And so if we can imagine how this trickles out to folks who have less than we have, just how horrific it must be. This has to serve as a meaningful call to action. I want to be super mindful. It's 8:55, and so I'm going to move forward towards our wrap up. And just remind everyone that the full report is available. It's on the homepage actually of NJ CASA's website. It's njcasa.org. At the beginning of our time together, Marissa put it into the chat box so you can find it there. It's also all over our social media, which is on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at this point in time. And I want to leave you with some of the recommendations that we've made. And we've touched upon all of them. So I feel very good that there seems to be some synergy and alignment. We've asked you all to be with us tonight because we greatly respect you. And so to know that we're not off the mark is assuring. So we know that there's a lot of work that lies ahead of us, and our report has outlined key recommendations and next steps for leaders to consider, including increased education and training, with a focus on information about sexual violence, how to respond to a disclosure of sexual violence, and how to report misbehavior, in addition to bystander training. So those are common themes that we discussed tonight. What do you do when someone discloses to you? Because we also know that sometimes we disclose to people that we think are trusted friends and confidants, and then they tell you, like, you know, why did you do that? Why did you go to the bar with that person for drinks? As if it's your fault for trying to be a human and conduct business in this transactional world that we're working in. So those are some of the training topics that we're suggesting. Strengthening and establishing basic structural supports and resources, including a standardization of a human resource type response, a non-partisan reporting system that removes partisan political organizations from investigation and response, and adaptive response systems that allow those who have been harmed to make decisions about what type of investigation that will occur. And so the work that we do with sexual assault survivors in general, we're really talking right now about transformative justice and restorative justice. The criminal legal system does not do justice for most survivors who come forward. And so the idea of really reimagining what justice and accountability can look like following the survivors or the complainant's lead is key for all of this if we want to shift culture and increase accountability. And investing in cultural change and accountability. So that those who intervene or speak up in toxic situations are praised, not punished, rejecting harmful norms, having zero tolerance policies, and placing the onus on every single one of us to call out harmful behavior when we see it, and to know that we can do so without fear of retribution. So I want to be clear, and Katie, I really appreciated that you highlighted some of the good work that's happening in New Jersey at the front end of our conversation. There is a lot of change that's happening. In addition to the party-driven changes we've previously discussed, we've ended enforceable NDAs in New Jersey. At least 2 partisan county political parties have enacted policies that require training for party leaders and candidates. The Senate Majority Leader formed the work group on misogyny, harassment, and assault in New Jersey government and politics. And we held a series of both public and private listening forums that were well attended and very informative. That report of the work group is forthcoming, which I think will be a good complement to the work that we've done here tonight. Both the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce and the League of Municipalities, 2 organizations that host popular sort of must-attend events for people involved in government and politics, have been working closely with NJ CASA to strengthen their policies and make their events safer. And I hope that this report can serve as a catalyst to expedite that work, to not let our foot off the pedal of progress. It's clear that we have some major issues in New Jersey politics. We have a power structure based on preserving transactional relationships to the detriment of true access and equity. As one respondent articulated, quote, "Sexual harassment is a gateway to misogyny in lawmaking." Let's walk away from tonight's discussion with that understanding in mind, that the attitudes and beliefs that allow this behavior to go unchecked and in some instances seemingly sanctioned are the attitudes and beliefs that are influencing decisions relating to policy and law. It's time to rid that from our politics and therefore our government. And let us, as collective leaders, let us commit to doing this work together. I want to thank our panelists for being with us tonight and thank all of you for being in attendance. We have a lot of work to do here in New Jersey, but I know that we're up to the task. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague Marissa, and so you can field any questions that may be lingering from attendees from the media.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you. Before I jump to media, thank you so much to our panelists. That was absolutely fabulous, and I am so grateful for all of you. I think as folks were kind of saying earlier, like, this isn't, for me and Patricia, this is our job, but for you, this is an extra thing that you do to help community members and all of us, and we're just really, really, really grateful for you. So thank you so much. For folks who are attending, who are members of a media organization, we're going to open it up for questions from you right now. So 2 ways to get my attention. Either you should be able to raise your hand, or if you write in the comment box your name and the organization that you're calling in from, I will unmute you and you can ask your question. Great, thank you, Sue. And thank you, Sue, for all the work you've done reporting on this. We really, really appreciate you.
We've solved all the world's problems in this discussion. Either there really are no questions or people are afraid to ask them because we were certainly not a shy bunch this evening.
What I'll also do, I'm going to drop my email in the chat box as well. If folks have questions afterwards and want to shoot them over to me, media questions, please feel free.
Oh, I see something else just popped up in it.
Oh, I see. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. I want to thank everyone for sticking with us so long. As you probably got the sense, I think there was so much more that we felt like we wanted to and perhaps even needed to get out. I found this to be a cathartic process, being in community with all of you. And what I find even more comforting is that there's just us on this screen tonight, but there are all these other people whose stories and experiences are coming to life because you all are generous with sharing your lived experiences and using them to enact change. And so it wasn't sort of hyperbole when I said, I know New Jersey is up to this task. There are, I know, Katie, you're not from New Jersey, but at this point, like, you're a Jersey girl.
10-year Jersey
I'm also not from New Jersey.
That's true, you're not either. But you guys are seriously, you're so Jersey girls. Your feistiness, your brilliance, like you are.
I embrace it, Sabine.
What do you? Get out of here! I'm cutting Sabine out of this conversation. What is she? Honestly,
I bought a house. We're gonna be here forever. I mean, we basically bought our plots. We're good.
All right, good. Because we have a lot of work to do together, and I am so appreciative that I get to do this work with you. Again, a huge shout out to Marissa. I have some of the best colleagues at NJ CASA. Many of them are still on the line watching. It's 9 o'clock at night. Again, y'all do this job all the time, and the fact that you log in to share in these types of conversations is a real testament to your commitment to the work and to the communities we serve. I know we have a lot more work to do, and I'm so looking forward to doing this with all of you. Please, everyone, take such good care of yourselves. We're in the middle of some really challenging political times, in the middle of a pandemic. The work that we're doing on this issue doesn't end because the rest of the world is imploding. In fact, it's perhaps more important than ever. This is the time for us to fight for equity and access and inclusion in so many of the different fields in which we're working, and making sure that we have a level, balanced playing field in the world of politics is a really great start to us making sure that the rest of our policies that we're enacting really do speak to transforming our communities and making everyone have a better quality of life. So with that, I want to thank our board members who are on the line. I know many of you are with us also. Thank you for supporting NJ CASA's harebrained ideas to take on difficult topics, and for you guys spending time with us on an evening like this. And we're going to end tonight's discussion with huge amounts of gratitude to each of you, both our panelists and all of our friends who are still on the line. Thank you all. Take good care.